At 2:14 Galactic Standard Time, every human colony in known space received the same message. It did not come with alarms. There were no war sirens, no emergency broadcasts, no desperate commanders shouting over static. Just a clean, polite transmission delivered through official Concord channels, translated into every known human language with perfect diplomatic courtesy. By unanimous decree of the Stellar Concord, all Terran expansion rights are hereby suspended. Every trade gate connected to human systems shut down at once. Cargo freighters carrying medicine vanished from shipping lanes. Colony stations waiting for oxygen processors watched their supply routes disappear from navigation maps. Financial accounts froze. Legal ownership registries flickered and rewrote themselves. Entire human settlements beyond Sol were suddenly marked with a single classification: temporary custodial territories. In one breath, humanity had gone from war heroes to administrative inconvenience. On the orbital command deck above Mars, Admiral Jonas Hale stood in absolute silence, staring at the transmission while the officers around him forgot how to breathe. 5 years earlier, those same alien leaders had begged Earth for help. The silent war had nearly ended the galaxy. A machine swarm from beyond the Dark Rim had crossed into civilized space and devoured entire systems without negotiation, without mercy, without even curiosity. Ancient empires with elegant fleets and perfect technologies had folded like paper. Humanity had not. We had fought ugly. We had fought with broken ships welded back together in orbit, with railguns that shook bones, with boarding actions so brutal that Concord historians later refused to describe them in official archives. We did not win because we were stronger. We won because we refused to stay dead. We buried 13 million people to save worlds that were not ours. And when the final machine world burned over frozen rings of Kalos Prime, the Concord promised humanity a permanent seat among the ruling powers of the galaxy. They promised partnership. They promised respect. Instead, they sent paperwork. Behind Hale, someone finally found their voice. "They quarantined us," Commander Elise Rowan said quietly, like saying it too loudly might make it more real. "No," Hale replied. His voice was calm. Too calm. "They audited us." Across the bridge, officers exchanged confused looks. Outside the viewport, Mars glowed red and patient beneath them, while traffic around the orbital docks slowed into frightened silence. Thousands of civilian vessels were stranded, waiting for permissions that would never come. A junior lieutenant swallowed hard. "Sir, should we mobilize a fleet?" Everyone turned. This was the moment history usually remembered: the speech, the fury, the declaration of war. Instead, Admiral Hale walked past the tactical displays, past the red warnings, and toward an old steel cabinet built into the far wall of the bridge. It looked absurd there among holograms and quantum relays, like a fossil someone had forgotten to remove. He unlocked it with a physical key. Inside was no weapon, no classified superweapon, no secret war protocol, just a thick paper file. Real paper. Old, worn, heavy. On the front, stamped in fading black ink, were 4 words: Emergency Custodial Authority. Commander Rowan frowned. "Sir, that file is from the first expansion era. It's centuries old." Hale opened it slowly, like a priest handling scripture. "Yes," he said, "and they should have destroyed it." Far beyond Mars, across 100 human colonies now being quietly strangled by polite alien law, families waited for supplies that would never arrive. Children on frontier moons watched station, lights dimmed to emergency power. Governors sent requests into systems that no longer recognized them. The Concord thought this would be clean. No war, no blood, just signatures, restrictions, and the slow suffocation of a species they had decided was too dangerous to trust. They believed humans would rage. They believed we would attack. They were prepared for violence. They were not prepared for accountants. Admiral Hale turned the first page. On every secure channel across Earth, a priority summons was sent. Not to generals, not to admirals, not even to politicians. To auditors, to contract lawyers, to logistics engineers, to archivists, to the people who remember where every supply line was buried and who had signed for every bullet fired in the silent war. Commander Rowan stared at him. "Sir, what exactly are we doing?" Hale looked back at the stars, at the empire that had mistaken patience for weakness. For the first time, he smiled. It was not the smile of a soldier preparing for battle. It was worse. "We are going," he said softly, "to check their books." And on the Concord capital world of Astorvale, High Chancellor Sirach received a single reply from Earth. No threats, no demands, just 2 words. Audit accepted. High Chancellor Sirach read the message 3 times before he allowed himself to laugh. The chamber around him joined in, though less confidently. The High Council of the Stellar Concord sat beneath the glass dome of Astorvale's Senate Spire, where artificial sunlight filtered through crystal panels and painted every polished surface in gold. It was a room designed to remind visitors that power here was old, permanent, and elegantly untouchable. Earth's reply sat in the center of the table, like a joke no one quite understood. Audit accepted. No threats. No fleet mobilization. No declarations of rebellion. Just that, Counselor Valen of the Frex Dominion adjusted the silver rings around his wrists and sneered. Humans always did enjoy primitive symbolism. Perhaps they intend to bore us into surrender with paperwork. A few diplomats chuckled. Sirach did not. He leaned back slowly, his long fingers folded beneath his chin. Blue-black eyes fixed on the message. He had spent 12 years studying humanity before recommending their containment. 12 years watching a species that smiled too easily, adapted too quickly, and treated impossible odds like personal insults. Humans were dangerous precisely because they did not think like civilized powers. Civilized species valued stability. Humans valued leverage. "They are not surrendering," Sirach said quietly. The room fell still. Counselor Valen frowned. "Their gates are closed. Their colonies are starving. Their fleet is cut off from central trade lanes. What exactly do you believe they can do?" Sirach tapped the screen once. "Ask yourself why they didn't threaten us." No one answered, because everyone in that room understood the same thing at once. Humans only stayed quiet when they were building something. Far across Concord space, Earth looked weak. That was the official story. Human colonies beyond the soul barrier were already rationing oxygen supplements. Medical stations on Titan Reach had begun reusing surgical sterilizers designed for single use. Mining platforms near Helios Drift lost reactor coolant shipments and switched to emergency reserves. Civilian transport lines froze. Food prices tripled in 6 days. Concord media called it unfortunate but necessary. "The Terran species is too expansionist," one polished commentator announced across 12 systems. "Containment ensures galactic peace." Another called humans a war species without a wallet. The phrase spread quickly. On Luna, nobody laughed. Deep beneath the old administrative districts of New Geneva, in a building so plain most people forgot it existed, lights were turning on for the first time in 20 years. No military insignia marked the walls. No armed guard stood outside. Only a brass plaque at the entrance. Terran Emergency Logistics Authority. Inside, the war room looked nothing like a war room. No tactical holograms. No admirals shouting over fleet positions. Just endless tables, files, projection walls full of shipping routes, cargo manifests, debt chains, and supply dependency maps stretching across the galaxy like veins. People in gray suits moved with terrifying speed. Elderly archivists who had once cataloged wartime treaties now opened sealed records with trembling hands. Freight coordinators who spent their careers scheduling or shipments were suddenly more important than generals. Insurance analysts were given military escorts. At the center of it all stood Director Mara Solis. She had never commanded a ship. She had never fired a weapon. During the Silent War, she controlled fuel allocation for 17 frontline sectors and once forced 3 alien admirals to delay an offensive because they had filed the wrong supply forms. Human soldiers called her more frightening than enemy artillery. Now, she stood before a wall-sized map of Concord infrastructure, coffee in one hand, glasses low on her nose, reading the galaxy like an autopsy report. Admiral Hale entered without ceremony. She didn't look up. "You're late. I was busy losing civilization." "Good. Sit down." He obeyed. That alone would have terrified most governments. Mara touched the display, and entire sectors lit up in cold blue. Here's what they think, she said. They believe they've isolated Earth economically. They believe human colonies depend on Concord-controlled gates, banking systems, and legal recognition. She touched another screen. Red lines spread everywhere. What they forgot is that during the Silent War, they outsourced survival to us. Hale said nothing, because this part mattered. When the machine swarm came, Concord's ancient systems had failed under real pressure. Their beautiful logistics models assumed rational enemies and stable infrastructure. The swarm had been neither. So humans stepped in. We rebuilt military supply chains. We standardized emergency routes. We managed battlefield insurance claims, fuel redistribution, and civilian evacuation corridors. We did not simply fight their war. We made sure their war could continue. Mara zoomed in. 82% of Concord's deep space cargo insurance still routes through Terran underwriting structures. Another shift. 60% of their gate maintenance certifications require wartime human compliance stamps. Another. Half their private security fleets are financed through debt instruments we wrote during the war. Commander Rowan, standing near the back, stared. You're telling me they locked us out of the system still running on our paperwork? Mara finally smiled. It was the kind of smile Storms probably had. I'm telling you, she said, that they declared ownership of a house whose plumbing we built. Hale leaned forward. And the file. She slid the ancient paper folder across the table. Emergency Custodial Authority. Signed during the second year of the Silent War, when Concord leaders were desperate enough to approve anything that kept them alive. Most of them had probably forgotten it existed. Humans had not. Rowan opened it and frowned. This is an event of systemic logistical collapse. Primary wartime contractors may assume temporary administrative control of all dependent assets. She looked up slowly. This is insane. No, Mara said. This is signed. Silence filled the room. Outside, on 1,000 worlds, human colonies were still waiting for food and medicine. Inside, Earth had just found the knife hidden inside the treaty. Hale stood. So, when do we strike? Mara took a slow sip of coffee. We already did. At that exact moment, on the pleasure world of Velis Prime, a Concord luxury station received notice that all incoming reactor coolant shipments had been delayed pending compliance review. 12 seconds later, 3 hospitals lost power. And that was only the first file she opened. The first world to panic was not a military fortress. It was a resort. Velis Prime existed for one purpose, to remind rich people they were rich. Floating gardens drifted above silver oceans. Artificial moons adjusted the tides for aesthetic preference. Entire weather systems were customized for weddings, diplomatic retreats, and the occasional very expensive apology. No one there thought about supply chains. They thought about sunsets, which was why the blackout felt like blasphemy. At 9:17 local cycle, the Western Medical District lost reactor coolant flow. Backup systems activated for exactly 4 minutes before failing under overload. Surgical theaters went dark. Climate domes destabilized. Emergency drones flooded the skyline like frightened birds. Guests in the Celestine Spire watched the lights flicker over champagne and assumed it was part of the entertainment. Then the elevators stopped. Then the private atmospheric stabilizers shut down. Then the hospitals began broadcasting civilian evacuation notices. Panic moved faster than truth. By midday, Velis Prime's governor was screaming into a secured Concord line, demanding immediate restoration of shipments classified as essential infrastructure. The answer came back maddeningly polite. Compliance review pending. Estimated resolution. Undetermined. No sabotage. No pirates. No visible attack. Just signatures. On Astorvale, High Chancellor Sirac stood before a wall of crisis reports while half the Concord Council tried to convince itself this was coincidence. It's one delayed shipment, Councillor Valen snapped. Humans are creating inconvenience, not strategy. Sirac did not turn. 3 hospital failures. 2 suspended security fleets. 9 luxury sectors now flagged for compliance breach. 12 insurers requesting emergency clarification on liability ownership. He finally faced them. They are not attacking our borders. They are attacking our assumptions. A silence followed, because deep down, everyone there understood the horror of it. War could be fought. This was worse. This was your own system deciding you no longer qualified to use it. Counselor Iris of the Solari Trade Houses leaned forward sharply, then override the compliance boards. We tried, Sirf said, and the boards requested proof of wartime authorization hierarchy. No one spoke, because that proof had once belonged to humanity. Because during the war, when machine fleets were burning worlds and Concord admirals were praying to gods they had stopped believing in centuries earlier, they had signed whatever humans placed in front of them: emergency approvals, expedited command structures, custodial dependencies, temporary authorizations. Temporary, as it turned out, was a very flexible word. Far from the panic of the Senate spire, Director Mara Solis sat in absolute peace. Her office on Luna looked less like the center of galactic destabilization and more like someone's overworked accounting department. Papers stacked in impossible towers. Coffee cups in various stages of archaeological significance. One very old desk lamp. She was reviewing freight rerouting requests while Commander Rowan stood nearby, still trying to emotionally process the fact that paperwork was now considered orbital weaponry. You crippled a planet with a delayed form. Mara signed something, without looking up. No, I reminded them they forgot to file one. Rowan folded her arms. This feels illegal. Mara looked up over her glasses. That's because you were raised by honest people. Before Rowan could answer, another alert appeared. Concord Central Fleet Insurance Authority. Emergency claim escalation. Mara opened it. Then she smiled. Hale, standing by the window, noticed immediately. That smile worries me. It should. She rotated the screen toward them. 3 Concord military fleets had attempted emergency asset transfers to bypass Terran-controlled insurance routes. Standard wartime clause violation. Because those fleets were partially financed under old Earth-backed combat debt. Any unauthorized redeployment triggered automatic collateral review. Translation: half their warships were now technically frozen assets. Commander Rowan blinked. You're telling me their own fleets need our permission to move? Not permission, Mara corrected. Documentation. Hale laughed once. A short, sharp sound with no joy in it. They betrayed the wrong species. Across the galaxy, the phrase human paperwork war began spreading through private channels with increasing alarm. Captains discovered docking rights suspended over unresolved wartime maintenance claims. Governors found trade licenses paused because human compliance officers had flagged old treaty violations no one remembered signing. Private security firms learned their weapons leases were tied to Terran arbitration courts. Nothing exploded. Nothing burned. But entire sectors began slowing like a machine, choking on its own forgotten screws. And then the banks called. That was when fear became real. The Concord Treasury Nexus, old, cold, and famously impossible to alarm, sent a direct request to Earth for clarification regarding legacy Terran insurance ownership across strategic military holdings. It was a financial equivalent of a god clearing its throat. On Astervale, Sirf read the notice and felt something he'd been avoiding since Earth's first reply. Not concern, not irritation, regret. He walked alone to the upper Senate gardens, where synthetic birds sang songs written by extinct civilizations and expensive silence passed for peace. He remembered the first time he had met Admiral Hale. The human had been younger then, standing on the bridge of a burning carrier, while machine drones tore through orbit like falling stars. Sirf had asked him how humans kept fighting, when logic said surrender would preserve more lives. Hale had answered without hesitation. Because if survival cost your future, you didn't survive. You just delayed extinction. At the time, Sirf had admired that. Later, he had decided it made humanity too dangerous to trust. Now, standing beneath a fall sunset, he wondered if perhaps the danger had never been human aggression. Perhaps it was human memory. A secure channel opened beside him. Counselor Valen's voice came sharp and breathless. Chancellor, you need to see this immediately. Sirf turned. What now? Valen swallowed. The Concord Treasury Nexus has completed the ownership review. A pause, then the words that made even Sirf's blood run cold. Earth owns the default insurance rights to 43% of our active fleet. For the first time in years, the Chancellor had no answer. Because somewhere on Luna, a woman with coffee stains on her desk and no military rank had just become more dangerous than every warship in Concord, and she had only opened the second file. By the end of the week, the Concord stopped calling it an inconvenience. They called it contamination. Entire sectors were slowing under invisible pressure. Cargo lanes jammed with vessels awaiting human compliance approvals. Merchant houses filed emergency insolvency claims. Luxury worlds rationed medicine, while agricultural moons quietly realized their fertilizer shipments were legally classified as suspended military support materials. Even species that had supported humanity's quarantine were beginning to ask dangerous questions. How much of the galaxy had humans actually been holding together? On the Senate floor of Astervale, High Chancellor Sirf watched the council descend into something very close to fear. Counselor Valen slammed both hands against the crystal table. This ends now. Freeze all Terran-linked arbitration channels. Seize their relay stations. Cut them out physically if we must. Counselor Iris turned sharply and announced to every neutral system that Concord law means nothing if we dislike the outcome. Half our economy runs on trust. Half our economy is being strangled by accountants because we signed the contracts. The chamber erupted. Voices rose. Alliances cracked. Species that had ruled together for centuries suddenly sounded like creditors at a funeral. Sirf remained silent until the noise exhausted itself. Then he stood. That was enough. The chamber obeyed. He looked older than he had a month ago. Power did that when it realized it was temporary. Earth wants us angry, he said. They want us reckless. They want us to choose force because force creates precedent. Counselor Valen's jaw tightened. Then what do you suggest? We ask permission to breathe. No, Sirf said. I suggest we remove the knife before pretending we are not bleeding. He activated the central display. 3 Terran relay stations appeared in orbit around frontier junctions near Concord control lanes. Small, old, barely defended by appearance. Symbols of human legal authority, more than military power. Valen smiled thinly. Then we take those. Sirf looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time he did not stop him. Do it cleanly, he said. No civilian casualties. No spectacle. But deep inside he already knew. There would be spectacle. There always was when humans were involved. 40 hours later, the Concord 3rd Expeditionary Fleet arrived at Relay Junction, Kepri. Captain Soul ran expected resistance. He found silence. The relay station floated alone against the stars like forgotten machinery from an older age. No patrol ships. No defensive grid. No human broadcast demanding negotiation. Just one quiet station orbiting a dead moon. His tactical officer frowned. Scans show minimal life support. Skeleton maintenance crew at most. Wren narrowed his eyes. Boarded. Docking clamps sealed with a heavy metallic thud. Concord Marines entered in full tactical armor, expecting sabotage, ambushes, maybe one final human gesture of defiance. Instead, they found empty halls. Lights were still on. Coffee cups sat half-finished. Desks remained open. Someone had left a handwritten note beside a terminal that simply read, "Please do not unplug the archive server." It gets dramatic. Captain Wren walked through the central operations chamber in rising unease. No blood, no panic, no people, only absence. His officer approached, pale. "Sir, there's a beacon in the main core, automated, waiting for unauthorized seizure confirmation." Wren turned slowly. "How long?" The answer came too fast. 30 seconds. Every instinct screamed. "Disconnect it." "Already tried, sir. It's hard-coded." 20 seconds. Across Concord legal networks, old treaties began waking up. 15. Dormant clauses buried beneath wartime emergency agreements started executing like sleeping weapons. 10. Neutral banking guilds received breach notices. Private military financiers were alerted to illegal asset seizure. Civilian trade courts were informed that Concord had violated protected contractor sovereignty. 5. Insurance authorities initiated military liability freezes. 3. 2. 1. The beacon transmitted, and across the galaxy, Concord's financial bloodstream froze. Captain Wren stared at the dead screen. Nothing exploded. Nothing burned. But he had just detonated an empire. On Astorvale, every secure terminal lit red. Emergency account restrictions. Fleet funding suspended. Military peril review initiated. Neutral worlds requesting clarification of Concord aggression. Counselor Iris actually whispered it first. Oh no. Valen stood frozen, his confidence finally cracking. Sirach closed his eyes. Because Earth had done exactly what he feared. They had left the relay undefended because they needed Concord to touch it. They had not protected the station. They had baited it. Commander Rowan stood in Luna's operations center watching the cascade of alerts with open disbelief. You left coffee. Mara Solis did not look up. Hospitality matters. You wanted them to board. Yes. You wanted them to trigger the breach clauses. Yes. Rowan stared. That is deeply unsettling. Mara stamped another authorization. Thank you. Admiral Hale stood beside the observation glass, watching Earth rise blue and patient over Luna's horizon. What's the damage? Mara answered without emotion. Concord military liquidity reduced by 40% in 6 hours. 5 client species have requested independent treaty review. 2 neutral banking houses suspended war credit lines. And Chancellor Sirach has exactly 1 remaining option. Hale already knew. He said it anyway. He goes after legitimacy. Mara nodded. Because economics hurt. But erasure killed. If Concord could remove humanity from legal existence entirely, erase Terran recognition from trade maps, citizenship registries, and war archives, then every contract, every claim, every custodial right will become infinitely harder to enforce. It was forbidden. It was ancient. And desperate powers loved ancient forbidden things. On Astorvale, in a chamber sealed so deeply beneath the Senate that even most council members believed it was myth, Sirach stood before the archive core. No sunlight reached here. Only old machines. Only history. A voice from the dark asked the question no leader should ever have to answer. Do you request civilizational nullification? Sirach said nothing for a long time, because there were lines. And because he knew, if he crossed this one, there would be no return. Humanity had once saved his world. He remembered that. He also remembered what happened to civilizations that let humans survive betrayal. Above him, the Concord was already shaking. Below him waited the power to erase Earth from the legal memory of the galaxy. Not destroy. Worse, make it as though humanity had never belonged. Sirach finally lifted his head. His voice sounded older than the stars. Yes. And somewhere far away, on Luna, every Terran archive alarm began to scream. The alarms on Luna did not sound like sirens. They sounded like heart monitors. Soft, repetitive, clinical, which somehow made them worse. Every screen inside the Terran Emergency Logistics Authority shifted at once. Shipping maps vanished. Identity registries blurred. Colonial ownership files began collapsing into blank spaces. Names disappeared from legal systems like they had never been spoken. Commander Rowan stared at her terminal as Titan Reach, 3 million civilians, 2 orbital hospitals, one of the oldest human settlements beyond Sol, simply vanished on the Concord trade map. Not destroyed. Deleted. Its routes no longer existed. Its contracts no longer existed. Its people were still alive, but legally, the galaxy had decided they were ghosts. What did they do? Rowan whispered. No one answered immediately, because everyone already knew. Mara Solis stood perfectly still, coffee forgotten in her hand, watching entire decades of human presence being peeled out of galactic memory. She said the words like a diagnosis. Civilizational nullification. Even Admiral Hale looked colder. The term was older than the Concord itself. A last resort doctrine from the age before diplomacy, when empires discovered that killing an enemy was sometimes less effective than proving they had never mattered. No trade rights. No citizenship recognition. No legal standing. No historical ownership. A species could survive physically and still be erased from civilization. It had only been used twice in recorded history. Both times, The target species had disappeared within 2 generations. Commander Rowan stepped closer to the display. "They're trying to make us impossible to defend." "No," Hale said quietly. "They're trying to make everyone else too afraid to admit we were worth defending." On the central wall, colony names continued disappearing like stars going dark. Mars Outbound, Kepler Refuge, Helios Drift, Ashfall Station. One by one, a junior archivist near the back actually started crying because she had spent 30 years preserving war records from the Silent War. 13 million human dead, every casualty carefully documented, and now entire memorial chains were being flagged for deletion. History itself was under attack. For the first time since the quarantine began, the room felt close to panic. Mara set her coffee down, very carefully. Then she walked to the center console and opened a file so heavily restricted that half the room didn't know existed. The ledger, no dramatic music, no glowing secret vault, just a black archive folder sitting quietly in a system older than most governments. Commander Rowan frowned. "What is that?" Hale answered before Mara could. "Our insurance." Years ago, during the Silent War, while admirals fought battles and politicians promised loyalty, someone on Earth had made a different decision. Someone had assumed betrayal, not because humanity was paranoid, because history taught us to prepare for gratitude to expire. Every promise, every battlefield order, every redirected fleet, every civilian world Earth saved while the Concord negotiated excuses, every casualty report, every war debt, every signed agreement, everything recorded, duplicated, hidden. The ledger was not a weapon. It was memory with teeth. Mara touched the archive. "If they want to erase us," she said, "they first have to explain why they're standing on graves we paid for." On Astorvale, Chancellor Sirach sat alone in his office, watching the nullification cascade proceed through Concord systems. He should have felt relief. The legal pressure from Earth was already weakening. Compliance boards were freezing under jurisdiction disputes. Human claims were losing enforcement speed. Neutral systems were stepping back, uncertain whether it was wise to support a civilization now marked for erasure. It was working, and yet Sirach felt none of the victory he had expected, only dread, because he knew humans, and humans did not panic quietly. His private terminal lit, a civilian emergency notice from the outer colonies, then another, public unrest, demonstrations, protests demanding answers. He frowned. This made no sense. Most civilians did not understand legal nullification. They should not even know it had happened yet. Then every screen in his office went black. For one terrible second, Sirach thought Earth had hacked the Senate core. He was wrong. This was worse. Across every public network in the Concord, from luxury towers on Velas Prime to worker habitats hanging over mining moons, a single broadcast replaced normal programming. No logo, no anthem, just names, rows and rows of names. Human names, a young mother on Kalos Prime, a Marine who died sealing a breach over Threx, a medic lost during the evacuation of Solari Reach, an engineer who held open a collapsing gate long enough for alien civilians to escape. Millions of them. Faces appear beside the names. Families, final recordings, service records, worlds they had saved. No speeches, no propaganda, just proof. Children across the galaxy asked their parents who these people were. And for the first time, the Concord had to answer honestly. They were the ones who bled for us. On Luna, Rowan watched the public feeds explode. Alien civilians were sharing names. Military veterans from non-human worlds were posting their own records, confirming human sacrifice. Hospitals on worlds Earth had saved began displaying the casualty lists in their entrances. The silence of betrayal was breaking. Mara watched it happen without satisfaction, only certainty. "We were never trying to win against the Council," she said. "We were waiting for the civilians to see what the Council did." Hale nodded. Revenge ends with them afraid. Justice begins when everyone else is ashamed. On Astorvale, Counselor Valen burst into Sirach's office in open panic. The streets are filling. Veterans are refusing orders. Some of the client species are demanding independent review of the Silent War archives. Sirach stood slowly, because now he understood. Earth never intended to defeat the Concord through contract alone. That was only pressure. The real attack was moral. Humans were not reclaiming power. They were forcing the galaxy to witness the price of betrayal. And public guilt was far harder to kill than legal evidence. His terminal flashed again. Priority alert. Terran Archive Authority has activated protected historical release protocol. Attached file, the ledger. Sirach stared at it. He did not open it immediately, because some doors, once opened, did not lead back. Outside his tower, the city was already beginning to chant, not for war, for truth. And deep beneath the old records of Earth, the full archive of Concord sins was waking up. The ledger opened like a funeral, not with explosions, not with speeches, with receipts. Across the stellar Concord, every public archive, every civilian terminal, every independent news relay, and every private legal database received the same encrypted release. It arrived without warning and with one impossible authentication seal, verified by Concord Wartime Authority. No one could dismiss it as propaganda, because the signatures were theirs. The first files were simple enough to understand. Emergency food shipments rerouted away from human refugee colonies to protect luxury districts on Velis Prime. Civilian evacuation corridors intentionally delayed because certain council members refused to sacrifice profitable mining worlds. Medical convoys denied passage to Terran field hospitals because Concord admirals had prioritized preserving museum planets over frontline lives. Then the deeper records emerged, proof that the quarantine of Earth had not been a fearful reaction after the war. It had been planned before the war ended. Private council transcripts showed the truth in cold, elegant language. Human casualties were considered strategically useful. Terran fleets were repeatedly assigned to the deadliest machine fronts because projected losses would reduce future political complications. A phrase from Chancellor Sirach's own private recommendation appeared on every screen in the galaxy. Let them become heroes first. Heroes are easier to contain than equals. The word spread like poison. On worker worlds, riots began before sunset. On military stations, veterans refused deployment orders. Alien families who had survived because humans died for them stood outside Concord government buildings demanding resignations, arrests, answers. The old order had not merely betrayed humanity, it had calculated the betrayal. And now everyone knew. On Luna, the operations room was quieter than ever. Commander Rowan stood before the live feeds, watching systems burn with protests, and for the first time she looked almost uneasy. We just set the galaxy on fire. Mara Solis, surrounded by 7 active legal terminals and what should probably have been a medical intervention regarding caffeine intake, answered without looking up. No, they built the fire. We turned on the lights. Admiral Hale stood near the main viewport, arms folded behind his back. Status: 3 Concord member species have formally withdrawn military support from the High Council, Mara said. 2 neutral banking houses have suspended all executive access to Chancellor Sirach. 12 civilian sectors had declared independent review councils. She tapped another file. And the Gate Authority just sent us something very funny. The main display shifted. Jump Gate Emergency Infrastructure Override. Primary Architect. Terran Systems Division. Commander Rowan blinked. They forgot we built the emergency backups too? Mara gave her a look. Never interrupt your enemy while they are making accounting mistakes. During the Silent War, when Concord jump gates had begun failing under machine assault, human engineers had installed hardline emergency rerouting systems. Primitive by alien standards, ugly by human standards, but functional. Everyone assumed they had been decommissioned after peace. Everyone was wrong. Across military sectors, Concord war fleets trying to reposition toward rebellious civilian worlds suddenly found their jump pads rerouted. Instead of arriving over protest cities, they emerged in empty border sectors. Fuel bleeding, commanders screaming at navigation officers who were equally confused. No hacking, no sabotage, just emergency infrastructure following its original human programming. Protect civilians first. The galaxy itself was beginning to choose sides. On Astorvale, Chancellor Sirf walked through streets he no longer recognized. Crowds filled the lower avenues beneath the Senate spire, carrying projected casualty names like candles. Human names beside alien ones. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with civilians who had never cared about politics until now. The chants were simple. Release the truth. Stand trial. Remember the dead. No one chanted for Sirf. No one defended him. Counselor Valen stormed beside him. His polished composure finally cracked into something desperate. This is insurrection. Deploy the planetary guard. Shut the networks down. Arrest the protest leaders. Sirf stopped walking. And prove them right. They already think we're monsters. No, Sirf said quietly. They think we are cowards. There is still a difference. For the first time in years, Valen looked afraid of him. Then what do we do? Sirf stared up at the Senate spire, at the seat of power he had spent his life protecting. He thought of Hale on that burning carrier years ago. He thought of the recommendation he had written. The one now poisoning every system in the galaxy. Let them become heroes first. He had believed stability justified cruelty. Now stability was collapsing anyway. He exhaled. We stop pretending this is still politics. That night, a message was transmitted across every active Concord channel. Not from Earth, from the High Council. By order of Chancellor Sirf, an emergency tribunal will be convened on Aster Vale. Full wartime records would be reviewed publicly. Council members accused in the ledger would stand for judgment. Counselor Valen called it surrender. Sirf called it survival. On Luna, Commander Rowan read the announcement twice. He actually did it. Hale's expression did not change. He had no other move left. Mara closed another file. He still thinks this could be contained. Rowan frowned. Can it? Mara finally looked up. No, because the judge is not us. Silence. Then Rowan understood. The Arbitration Corps. During Concord's founding, before alliances were trusted and before species agreed whose laws matter more, they had built one thing everyone feared equally, an independent judicial intelligence. Not a ruler, not a government. A machine trained only to interpret Concord law without politics, bribery, or species loyalty. It had not been used in over a century, because no leader was foolish enough to stand before a judge that could not be manipulated. Until now, Hale spoke softly. Sirf thinks he's choosing a fair trial. Mara shook her head. He's choosing an honest one. On Astervale, the tribunal chamber was open for the first time in generations. Ancient doors of black alloy parted with the sound of old consequences waking up. Inside waited no throne, only a circle of light. And at its center, a single voice asked a question every empire eventually hears. State your defense. Chancellor Sirf stepped forward. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the chamber, Earth waited. The tribunal chamber had been built to make lives feel small. No banners hung there. No species symbols. No ceremonial guards pretending power was sacred. Just a vast circular hall of dark stone and pale light, carved long before the Concord learned how to decorate its guilt. At the center stood Chancellor Sirf. For the first time in 30 years, he had nowhere to hide. Above him, suspended in the chamber like a second moon, the Arbitration Corps awakened. It had no face, only a voice. Cold, precise, impossible to charm. State your defense. Across the galaxy, billions watched. Factories stopped. Ships paused in orbit. Even riot-filled streets went silent as the live tribunal feed spread through every active channel. For once, the galaxy was not watching a war. It was watching accountability. Sirf stood alone beneath the white light. He did not begin with denial. That surprised everyone. Yes, he said. His voice echoed like confession. We planned Earth's containment before the war ended. A ripple moved through every world listening. Counselor Valen, standing among the accused, looked like he had been stabbed. Sirf continued. We believed humanity was too volatile, too adaptive, too willing to survive at any cost. We believed if they remained equal partners after the Silent War, they would eventually eclipse every founding species of this Concord. He lifted his head. And we were right. The chamber stirred. But being right, Sirf said, did not make us just. The Corps processed in silence. Then, did you knowingly assign Terran fleets to statistically fatal engagements for political convenience? A pause, long enough to hurt. Yes. Commander Rowan, watching from Luna, actually stepped back from the screen. She had known. Everyone had known. But hearing it said aloud felt different. It made ghosts heavier. Across human colonies, old veterans sat in silence. Some cried. Some simply stared. Because after years of suspicion, after decades of memorial speeches wrapped in polite lies, the truth was finally being spoken where no one could bury it. The course shifted. Did you authorize civilizational nullification with full knowledge that it will result in generational cultural extinction? Sirach closed his eyes. Yes. No excuses. No diplomatic language. Just yes. And somehow that made it worse. Counselor Valen stepped forward in fury. This is madness. You cannot confess weakness before predators. Sirach turned slowly. No, he said. We confess weakness the day we betrayed allies who trusted us. Valen's voice rose, cracking with panic. They are dangerous. Look what they have done. They dismantled fleets with paperwork, turned our citizens against us, took our gates, our banks, our laws. They used our laws, Sirach interrupted. They used our systems, our signatures, our greed. Humanity did not conquer us, Valen. They simply stopped protecting us from ourselves. Silence hit like impact, because everyone watching knew it was true. Humans had not broken the Concord. They had removed the scaffolding, and the Empire had collapsed under its own weight. Then Valen smiled. It was a terrible thing to see. Small, sharp, final, then let it collapse. He reached into his sleeve. Commander Rowan swore. Mara was already moving. Damn it! On the tribunal feed, Valen produced a slim crystalline key, small enough to fit in a palm, old enough to terrify anyone who recognized it. Hale's face went cold. The colony failsafe. During the Silent War, every Terran frontier habitat had been built with emergency life support overrides tied into Concord Command Authority. A precaution, they had called it, a safety measure. Another leash. Most had assumed the system was obsolete. It wasn't. If activated, it would shut down atmospheric processors, food grids, medical support, entire colony infrastructures. Millions would die quietly, not by bombardment, by suffocation. Valen held the key like religion. If humanity wants custody, he said, voice shaking with triumph and madness, let them inherit ashes. Across Earth's command centers, alarms exploded. Life support countdowns initiated. Titan Reach. Ashfall Station, Kepler Refuge, 37 colonies. Commander Rowan's hands flew across her terminal. He's live-linked. We can't stop it fast enough. Mara didn't answer. She was already opening something deeper than emergency protocols, deeper than legal authority, deeper than the ledger. Admiral Hale stared at the screen, utterly still. Then he said the words no one in that room expected. Let him press it. Rowan turned. Are you insane? He already lost, Hale said. He just doesn't know where. On Astervale, Valen slammed the key into the tribunal console. The chamber lights died. Across 37 colonies, emergency systems surged, and then stopped. No collapse, no suffocation, no darkness. Instead, every screen in the tribunal chamber changed. Not warning signs, authorization notices. Transfer of primary custodial control confirmed. By activating the colonial failsafe, Valen had triggered the oldest buried clause in Terran wartime architecture. Any executive who attempted mass civilian termination automatically forfeited all emergency governance rights to the original survival contractors. Earth. It had been there for 2 centuries. Signed by Concord. Forgotten by everyone except the species that expected betrayal as a survival trait. Valen stared at the screen like language itself had betrayed him. No. Mara's voice came through every channel in the chamber. Calm. Almost polite. Yes. Across Concord capital systems, government authorities shifted in real time. Defense grids, treasury access, orbital traffic control, executive authentication. All of it transferred. The lights of Astervale dimmed. Then, one by one, the stars of the old Concord vanished from government displays, replaced by a single Terran seal. Custodial authority confirmed. In the tribunal chamber, Valen fell to his knees. Sirf did not move. He simply watched the Empire end. And on Luna, Admiral Hale looked at the silent room around him and said the only thing left to say, "Prepare transport." Rowan swallowed. For what? Hale turned toward Earth, rising blue beyond the glass. For the part where we decide what mercy looks like. When the transports landed on Astorvale, there were no victory parades, no marching fleets, no banners draped across Concord towers. Human ships descended through the pale morning clouds in absolute silence, clean white hulls reflecting the broken light of the Concord capital. They looked less like invaders and more like auditors arriving for an overdue appointment. Below them, the streets were full. Not riots this time. Witnesses. Alien civilians stood shoulder to shoulder with human veterans beneath the Senate spire, watching the old government end not with fire, but with paperwork. Some expected executions. Others expected revenge. Most expected humiliation. They did not yet understand humanity. Admiral Jonas Hale walked to the grand doors of the Senate with no escort except Commander Rowan and Director Mara Solis, carrying a tablet that probably terrified more people than an army. At the center of the chamber sat the former High Council, not in chains, not broken, just smaller. Counselor Valen looked like a man discovering that fear had no bottom. Chancellor Sirf sat in silence, older now, stripped of titles but somehow heavier with honesty than it had ever been with power. Hale stopped before them. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Sirf looked up. "So this is it." Hale studied him. "No," he said. "This is accounting." Mara stepped forward and placed the tablet on the crystal table. Not a sentence. Not an execution order. A reconstruction mandate. Every colony abandoned during the quarantine would be rebuilt using Concord Treasury reserves. Every world that lost infrastructure due to political betrayal would be restored first. Every family of every human casualty erased from official history would receive permanent recognition in the central archives of a new administration. Every species harmed by the old council's manipulations would have independent representation under the custodial charter. No revenge taxes, no slavery, no exile fleets, just responsibility. Valen stared at the document in disbelief. "That's it? After everything, you expect us to rebuild roads?" Commander Rowan almost laughed. Mara answered first. "Yes." She leaned closer. "You thought punishment meant pain. It means accountability." Valen's voice cracked. "You should hate us." Hale finally let some of the old fire show. "We did. That was never the problem." He stepped closer. The problem was deciding whether hatred deserved ownership of the future. Outside, the city waited. Inside, the Empire was being rewritten. Sirf looked at the reconstruction order, then at Hale. "You could have taken everything." Hale nodded once. "We did." Confusion crossed the chamber. He turned and gestured toward the city below. The workers repairing transit rails, the reopened hospitals, the shared engineering crews, the food convoys moving without bribes or political tariffs for the first time in generations. We took control. We took the systems. We took the right to decide what happens next. What we did not take was your chance to become better. For the first time, Sirf smiled, a tired, painful thing. "Humans are strange." Rowan folded her arms. "We get that a lot." By sunset, the stellar Concord formally ceased to exist. In its place rose the Terran Custodial Union. Not an empire, but a framework built on one rule the old galaxy had forgotten. Power belonged to those willing to protect people, not merely rule them. The council towers were converted into public administration halls. The private pleasure gardens of the elite became memorial parks. Trade routes reopened under transparent law. Neutral species returned to negotiations without fear of hidden fees disguised as diplomacy. And in the center of Astorvale, where the founders of the Concord had once carved their own names into stone, humanity built something else. A wall. Simple. Black. Endless. Every human name lost in the silent war. Every soldier, medic, engineer, pilot civilian, and child whose sacrifice had nearly been erased by convenience. No grand statues, no heroic poses, just names. And beneath them one sentence. We remembered. On the first day it opened. The line stretched for miles. Alien families came carrying flowers for human strangers who had once saved them. Veterans from forgotten sectors stood in silence before names they had thought the galaxy had buried. Even Chancellor Sirf came alone. No cameras, no guards, just an old man standing before a wall of consequences. He stopped at one name and remained there for a very long time. Admiral Hale found him near dusk. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Sirf asked, "Do you know what history will call this?" Hale lit an older cigar, the smoke curling into the evening air like memory, refusing to disappear. "They'll call it whatever survives." Sirf nodded slowly. "And what should they call it?" Hale looked at the stars above Astervale, stars humanity had once entered as beggars, then soldiers, then ghosts. Now something else. "Proof," he said. "Proof of what?" Hale smiled faintly. That the most dangerous thing about humans was never our ships, never our weapons, never even our anger. He looked back at the wall. It was the fact that we keep records. Far above them, the first ship built entirely under the new custodial charter entered orbit. Not a battleship, a colony vessel. Its name burned across the hull in quiet white letters. Legacy. And as it turned toward the stars, carrying students, engineers, diplomats, and children toward worlds no longer ruled by fear, the galaxy learned a lesson it would teach for 10,000 years. Never betray humanity. Because humans do not simply survive. They remember, and if necessary, they will rebuild the universe around that memory.